Yo, what is up guys, Ghost here. Welcome back to another video here on Stormgate Central. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Infernal faction for Stormgate and whether at the moment you guys feel that they are a little bit too easy to play. Now, before we get into the meat and bones of this video, I do want to preface this by saying I'm not really talking about balance here. Obviously, there is a ton of stuff that is yet to change in Stormgate. We've yet to get the third faction. We yet to have all of the tier 3 units. And I can say, as somebody who's been in the past few beta and alpha tests, that the Infernals have gone through many different changes. In fact, the first test that they were put into the game, they didn't even have the charge system for spawning units. So before people start taking up their pitchforks in the comments and saying, oh, stop talking about balance, we're not talking about balance here. I just want to discuss a little bit about how Frostgiant plan to counteract the fact that the Infernals, at least at the moment, are just a much more forgiving faction to play. Guys, as always, if you enjoy the content here on the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We will be covering lots more on Stormgate going into the future. News, guides, casts, and etc. Thank you guys so much for the support. So let's talk about the main difference between the Infernals and the Vanguard here, and that is the charge mechanic for building units. So as most of you will know, the Vanguard make units like you do in most other RTS games. You queue up a unit, you spend the resources, and you can queue up additional units for resources if you like, but only one unit will be made at a time. The Infernals, on the other hand, don't have to queue up units because their production structures actually save up 3 charges, and then whenever they build a unit, it comes out instantaneously, it takes the resources off of you, and it consumes one of those charges. And this, in my mind, just makes the Infernals so much easier as a macro race when compared to the Vanguard. So why is that exactly? Well, first of all, you don't really get punished as Infernals for missing units and hitting those macro beats, which allows you to spend way more time microing. If you're playing as the Vanguard, which is my main race, you have to make sure that you hit those macro beats once you're out across the map, doing your micro, creeping, whatever it is. Otherwise, you've lost out on that building time, right? Once you've lost that building time, you're not getting it back. For the Infernals, it doesn't really matter if you miss one cycle or you miss even a second cycle because you're saving up those charges. And if you've been having an intense micro battle with your opponent and then you go up at your base and you're like, oh damn, I forgot to build any units, it's not really a big deal. They just pop out instantly, it doesn't cost you any time, it doesn't cost you any more resources, and you're good to go. Now, another really big point here is that you can be more reactive on which units you build based on your enemy's composition, right? So let's say you see the enemy walking across the map and you can see, okay, they've got a bunch of Exos and they've got a bunch of Lancers. This is the composition that I want to build to combat that. You can't really do that with the Vanguard because you have to keep building your units on the go. And if all of a sudden you just see, oh wow, he's got like a bunch of Magmadons or he's got a bunch of Hellborns, I don't have the right composition for that. Sure, you can go ahead and try to power build some new production buildings and get something out really quickly, but you've kind of just got what you've got at that time, and you better hope that it works. Now, this also goes for workers and saturating expansions, and this is one of the best things about the Infernals, in my opinion. If you're playing as the Vanguard, generally speaking, the way that you expand is once you've gotten a couple of extra bobs on one of your Luminite mines, you will likely pull those 2 bombs, you pull a couple of bombs from the Therium patch, then you have to make sure to pop Bob Overcharge once they're still in range of the command post, and then you go and you power build your command post. And then once you've done with that, you have to rally all of your command posts to that 3rd base or the 4th base or whatever base it is, and build at least, I would say, 2 if not 3 rounds of Bob workers. The great thing about the Infernals is that once you've saturated all of your bases, your shrines are still going to continue to each hold 3 charges for imps. So whenever you decide to move out and take a new base, you just rally all of your shrines over there, you press the A key 12 times, and boom, you've got 12 imps, you're fully saturated, and you can even go and re-rally those shrines to their next location. Whereas if you're playing on Vanguard, you know, you've got to remember to hit your macro cycles to build bobs, and then when you're done with that, you also have to remember to re-rally your command post to wherever you want to build bobs next, otherwise you're going to end up with way too many on that Luminite mine. Now, when you add to that you also have the top bar ability that allows you to replenish the charges on any of your production buildings, I feel like this mechanic just makes macroing for the Infernals vastly superior to that of the Vanguard, and it certainly requires a lot more APM. In fact, I would say that in general, the Vanguard, whilst they certainly don't require as much APM as like a StarCraft 2 faction, they really do require a lot more than the Infernals. Something else the Infernals also have a much easier time with is actually building buildings. And yes, I know when you build a building, it does consume the imp, and we'll get to some of the drawbacks or some of the trade-offs for the Infernals in a minute. But if we just take a look at the APM required and how sort of difficult and tricky it can be to construct buildings. For the Infernals, let's say that you want to construct a shrine, you select an imp, you hit the hotkey with the shrine, click on the map, and Bob's your uncle. You don't really have to think about anything else, and even the imp itself is consumed, so you don't have to like rally the imp to wherever you want it to go next. When you're talking about building with the Vanguard, as I mentioned before, building, for example, a command post can be a pain in the rear because you have to take the right number of bobs, you have to make sure you're taking 2 off of this Luminite mine and 2 off that one and 2 off the Therium, and you've got to sort of get 4 workers together. Then you've got to hit your overcharge and make sure that they're in range of the overcharge and that the overcharge doesn't run out and all this sorts of stuff going on. And it gets even worse if you want to construct multiple buildings. So if you want to construct 3 Iron Vaults for the Infernals, you take 3 imps, you hit Z and then D, then you hold shift, you click 3 times, and each imp is going to go and construct its own separate Iron Vault. If you take 3 bobs and you do the same thing with barracks, all 3 of the bobs are going to go and construct the first barracks, then they're going to construct the second barracks, and then they're going to construct the third barracks, instead of one bob going and doing each one, which is obviously the more efficient way overall of doing things. So if you want to do that, you have to pull the 3 bobs, then you've got to individually click on each bob, tell it to build the barracks, click on the next bob, hit Z, hit D, tell it to build the barracks, and then do the same thing for the third bob. It's a lot more fiddly, and if you're busy microing, you're macroing, and you want to throw down 3 barracks, it really is a major pain in the rear when you compare it to the Infernals. Now, that isn't to say that the Infernals always have it easier than the Vanguards, that is by no means the case. So first of all, the Infernals obviously can't speed up building production, and their buildings take longer to produce. So a barracks only takes 40 seconds to produce, a hangar bay and a mech bay takes 45 seconds. All of the unit production buildings for the Infernals take 60 seconds, and unlike the Vanguard, they cannot power build or use Bob Overcharge or any of that stuff. So you really do have to plan ahead as the Infernals. Whilst their unit production may be a little bit more forgiving, if you don't have those production buildings down in time, you can really get overrun by your opponent very, very quickly indeed. And the same thing goes for being supply blocked. Obviously the Vanguard, if they go, oh damn, I'm supply blocked, I forgot to build a habitat, they can just get a couple of bobs and power build one super quickly. The Infernals have no choice but to wait out the timer for their meat farm. Also, whilst the charge system for units is really, really nice, the Vanguard can queue up units. So you can move out across the map, you can queue up units if you're going to be busy microing or you're maybe just not that great of a player, and those units are going to continue to produce, whereas the Infernals can't really do that. And perhaps this is only really relevant to the beginning of a game where you want to be spamming out a worker as soon as it's ready. You know, the Vanguard player can always queue up an extra worker, so as soon as one finishes, the next one starts, whereas the Infernals can't really do that, right? If you want to be spamming out that charge ASAP, you really have to be on the ball. You have to make sure that as soon as that first charge is ready, you build an imp, otherwise you're going to be losing mining time. But once you get to like the mid game, late game, I really feel like the Infernals have a major advantage. Also, as I previously mentioned, of course it costs you an imp every time you make a building for the Infernals, but Frostgiant have done a lot in terms of balance to offset this here. So first of all, you start with an extra worker, you start with 9 workers as the Infernals, as opposed to the 8 workers that the Vanguard get, and then all of the buildings are cheaper. So a habitat for the Vanguard will cost you 100 Luminite, a meat farm for the Infernals only costs 50, because obviously you're putting the 50 Luminite from the imp into that as well. Similarly, a shrine only costs 350 instead of 400, an Iron Vault only costs 100 instead of the 150 for barracks and etc. So it's not like the Infernals don't have any drawbacks whatsoever, but at the moment I'm just wondering how Frostgiant plan to balance this huge amount of extra APM that is required for the Vanguard at the highest level. Right now to me it sort of feels like they want to make one of the factions a little bit more accessible and easier to play in terms of macro, and then they want the other faction, the Vanguard at the moment, to have a higher skill ceiling. The thing is, if you want to balance the game around that, and the Vanguard are inherently better than the Infernal when played at the highest level, and when played to perfection if you want to say, then obviously we will be seeing the leaderboard absolutely chock full of Vanguard players in the upper echelons. But that's not the case, right? We're seeing a pretty good 50-50 representation of both Vanguard players and Infernal players. Now, obviously, I'm not the highest level player, so maybe I'm not the best person to speak about this, as often these kind of games are balanced for the highest level of play. But I am a main Vanguard player, and for me personally, whenever I go and switch over to the Infernals, it just feels a lot easier. I've also seen from looking up people's accounts that people generally seem to have a higher MMR as the Infernals than they do as the Vanguard, and that may just come down to not just the fact that the Infernal units are better and that the balance is out of whack or something, but simply that they have more APM to dedicate to microing as the Infernals than when they're playing as the Vanguard and things get a little bit more dicey, a little bit more messy all the time. I also want to make it clear that I am not complaining in this video. I thoroughly expect Frostgiant to make lots of changes to the macro for both the Vanguard and the Infernals, probably more so the Infernals, going forward here. We are of course going to be getting a third race later on this summertime, and I'm super excited to see just how different they are in terms of macro. If we look at the differences between the Vanguard and the Infernals, I really love the differences that are there. I just wonder how Frostgiant plan to make up for the sort of skill gap there in terms of macro ability required. So again, I'm not really complaining about this. I just wanted to give my observations and my feedback on what I feel like so far, and I would love to hear your guys' down in the comments section below. Also, if you feel confident in doing so, let me know what your MMR is, because if there are any high level players watching this video, I would love to know what you guys think about the difference between Infernals and Vanguard. In any case guys, I hope you enjoyed this little discussion here today. If you did, leave a like down below, and go and check out this video here highlighting some awesome community resources for Stormgate if you missed that one the other day. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.